Shropshire Reserve, 28 miles north of where Georgia Williams went missing. Police are searching one of a number of sites in a wide-ranging inquiry across England, Wales and Scotland.
The first answer came in a quiet stretch of North Wales, far from Georgia Williams's home, far from the road she had walked down, far from the people waiting for her to walk back through the door. For days, her family had been told to hope she had gone to a friend's house, hope she had lost track of time, hope the silence from her phone meant nothing, hope the young woman everyone described as bright, driven, and full of life was still somewhere out there. But when officers searched woodland near the Nanty Garth Pass, the story changed. The search was no longer about where Georgia had gone. It became about why she had never come home. Then the truth sharpened into something worse. The man responsible was not a stranger who appeared from nowhere. Police had known his name. Professionals had seen warning signs years earlier. There had been another girl, then another incident, then another frightening encounter. Still, Jamie Reynolds remained free long enough for Georgia Williams to trust him, to walk into his home, and to lose her life. So this case is not only about one killer, it is about a question that still follows every record, every review, every apology, and every family statement. How many warnings should it take before someone acts? Welcome to North American Case Files. If you follow true crime stories that focus on facts, accountability, and the people behind the headlines, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Georgia's story deserves attention because it shows what happens when danger is seen, recorded, discussed, and still not stopped. Georgia Williams was 17 years old when she was murdered on the 26th of May, 2013. She lived in Wellington, Shropshire, a town where ordinary routines often carry a sense of safety. She was not someone living on the edge of society. She was not disconnected from family or community. She had parents who loved her, a sister who knew her as more than a sibling, friends who trusted her, and a future she had already started building. Court records describe Georgia as an impressive young woman. She had overcome painful experiences at school and had grown into someone who cared deeply about others who felt isolated. She had taken leadership roles at college. She was a mentor, a student counselor, and head girl. She was active in sport. She had served with the RAF Air Cadets. She wanted a career in the RAF. Those facts matter because Georgia was more than the final hours of her life. She was a young woman moving towards something. She had plans. She had discipline. She had a strong sense of fairness. She had a way of making people feel included because she knew what exclusion felt like. And that kindness became one of the cruelest parts of this story. Jamie Reynolds was known to Georgia. That single fact changed everything. There was no moment when she saw him as an obvious threat. He was part of the world around her. He was familiar. He seemed quiet. He presented himself as someone who needed help with a photo shoot. He gave Georgia a reason to believe the evening would be harmless. On Sunday, the 26th of May, 2013, Georgia left her home at about 7:30 in the evening. Her family believed she was going to spend time with friends. In public timelines, police later said the last texts sent from her phone were around 8 that night. They believed she was killed sometime between 8 and 9. Those times sit close together. A walk from home, a meeting with someone she knew, a phone still active, then silence. That is how fast a normal evening became a criminal investigation. Reynolds had told Georgia the purpose of the meeting was photography. He had used that false pretext before. According to the court, this was not a sudden act. It was planned. It was prepared. The judge later said Reynolds had targeted Georgia as one of a number of potential targets and had written more than 40 storylines with violent themes involving young women. One of those storylines named Georgia. That is one of the first moments where this case moves beyond ordinary horror. This was not only a crime after the fact. It was a crime that had existed in writing before Georgia walked into the house. Reynolds had chosen the setting. His parents were away. He had access to the house. He had created the cover of a photo project. He had reached out to other young women too, presenting the same idea as harmless fun. Around 16 young women had been contacted in the lead-up to that week. Some showed interest for later days, but Georgia came first. That detail matters because it shows wider danger. Georgia was the victim, but court records show she was not the only young woman Reynolds had tried to draw toward that house. Inside the home, he used the language of a staged image. He asked Georgia to take part in a simulated pose for the camera. The court later described how he used the photo shoot to secure her cooperation. Georgia trusted the situation because she thought it was performance, not danger. Then Reynolds killed her. The official post-mortem found she died from asphyxia caused by pressure to the neck. That is the fact recorded publicly. The full circumstances were described in court as planned, sadistic, and sexually motivated. Out of respect for Georgia and her family, this script will not repeat the most disturbing details. What matters for the documentary record is clear. Reynolds used trust as a weapon. He killed a 17-year-old girl who believed she was helping him. Afterward, he did something that made the family's suffering worse. He used Georgia's phone. Court records show Reynolds had obtained her phone password. After he killed her, he sent messages from her phone to Georgia's mother. The purpose was to create the impression that Georgia had left his home safely and gone elsewhere for the night. When Georgia's mother reached out the next morning, Reynolds replied again while pretending to be Georgia. He also texted Georgia's sister, maintaining a false appearance of concern. It was more than a delay tactic. The judge described it as playing games with the family. Think about the emotional cruelty without needing any extra detail. A mother sees a message from her daughter's phone and feels relief. A family holds back panic because the phone says she is safe. A sister receives words that look like concern. Behind each message is the person responsible for the silence. That deception bought Reynolds time. On Monday, the 27th of May, Reynolds left Wellington in a silver Toyota Hiace van. Public timelines place the route through Oswestry, Rhyl, Chester, and Kendal before Glasgow. The distance was not random. It created movement across England, Wales, and Scotland. It stretched the investigation. It turned one town's fear into a wider search. Georgia's family reported her missing on Tuesday, the 28th of May. By then, every hour mattered. Her absence was out of character. A young woman with plans and responsibilities does not simply disappear without explanation. Her family contacted people who knew her. Nobody had seen her. Nobody had the answer they needed. On Wednesday, the 29th of May, police appealed for help. They focused on Reynolds's silver Toyota Hiace van and his movements. They revealed that Georgia's father, Steve Williams, was a serving detective constable with West Mercia Police. Officers also made a public appeal directly to Georgia, asking her to contact police or her parents if she could hear them. That appeal now reads, with painful hindsight, the public still hoped Georgia might be alive. The police still needed to account for the van. Her family still needed answers. Reynolds had already crossed into Scotland. That same day, officers in Glasgow arrested Reynolds in a hotel on suspicion of kidnap. He was known to Georgia, but he was not her boyfriend. Police searched properties in Glasgow and searched his home in Avondale Road, Wellington. By Thursday, the 30th of May, Reynolds was back in Telford, questioned by West Mercia Police on suspicion of murder. The investigation then turned toward the route. Police released details of his journey and appealed for anyone who saw the van to come forward. This is where one small public detail became critical. Reynolds's van had become stuck in mud near the area. Where Georgia's body would later be found, people had helped move it. There was a photographic record. That mistake placed investigators closer to the truth. On Friday, the 31st of May, police searching woodland near the Nanty Garth Pass found a body. Reynolds was charged with Georgia's murder. That same day, police said they believed Georgia was deceased and that she had died at an address in Wellington. On the 4th of June, Georgia was formally identified through dental records. The cause of death was confirmed as pressure to the neck. The search was over. The case was not, because once police examined what Reynolds had done before, the story became harder to accept. Years before Georgia's murder, there had been another teenage girl. In January 2008, Reynolds lured a young woman to his home under a false pretext involving photographs for what he claimed was a media project. The court later noted similarities to the way Georgia was deceived. The young woman became uncomfortable. She refused to move further into the house. Reynolds attacked her and tried to strangle her. She fought him off and escaped. Police were called. At the time, Officers found troubling material linked to Reynolds. Public reporting on the later review said images of schoolgirls with nooses drawn around their necks were discovered and handed to police. A doctor assessed Reynolds and said he posed a significant risk to others because he appeared to have moved from viewing violent material to acting on it. That should have changed everything. But the 2008 incident was dealt with by way of a final warning, not prison, not a full risk system strong enough to follow him for years, not a process that warned every young woman whose image had been altered, a final warning. The sentencing judge later said that in retrospect, the incident was extremely serious and potentially fatal. The serious case review raised serious concerns about the quality of that earlier police investigation. It said the inquiry was narrow in perspective and appeared aimed at a speedy resolution. Those words sound administrative, but behind them is a terrible reality. A teenage girl survived. The warning signs were there. The danger was recorded. The chance to act was missed. Then came another incident. In August 2011, a female work colleague rejected Reynolds's advances. According to the court, he deliberately reversed his car at speed into hers. She also appeared in one of his violent storylines and in an altered image. Police were involved, but the case was not joined up with the earlier attack in a way that stopped the escalation. Another warning. Another moment where someone might have asked whether these were isolated events or part of a pattern. Then came February 2013, only months before George's death. Another young woman was lured to Reynolds's family home while his parents were away. According to the court, he locked the doors and claimed he did not know where the keys were. She was trapped for about an hour. He tried to persuade her to stay the night. She refused. She screamed, threatened to escape through a window, and only then did he produce the keys. Court records show he had prepared for violence on that occasion too. This detail is chilling, because it came so close to George's death. It showed a pattern of lure, isolation, control, and fear. It also showed that the danger was escalating. By May 2013, Reynolds had an electronic collection of more than 16,800 extreme images and 72 videos. He had written about 40 violent storylines. Many used real young women he knew as targets. He had altered images of young women. He had made approaches under false pretexts. He had already attacked one girl. He had frightened another. He had tried to punish rejection. When the court later looked at all of this, the judge said George's murder was not a one-off. It was in character with a pattern of thinking and behavior going back years. That is the part of the case that carries the deepest public question. Was George murdered by one man only, or did a wider system fail to act on what it already knew? Legally, Reynolds alone was convicted of George's murder. That matters. Responsibility for the killing rests with him, but reviews, apologies, and public statements later raised another issue: risk management. Agencies had pieces of the picture. They did not place those pieces together in time. A serious case review later found that 8 agencies had been involved after the earlier incident. Those agencies included police, mental health services, children's services, and probation-related services. The review found a confused and uncoordinated approach. Each contact with Reynolds was treated in a way that did not fully build the larger risk picture. That is how dangerous patterns survive. One agency sees one part, another sees another part. A file closes. A warning stays in one place. A name appears again, but nobody connects it with the old incident. A young woman walks into a house because she does not know what others knew. This is why George's case still matters. It is not a story about hindsight only. It is a story about information that existed before the murder. George's parents later said her death could have been prevented. Steve and Lynette Williams described Reynolds as a murderer in the making. They said the report and the failings of agencies made it obvious to them that the warning signs had been there. Those are their words as grieving parents, and they carry the weight of people who lost a daughter after warnings went unheeded. West Mercia Police Chief Constable David Shaw publicly apologized. He said the force could and should have done better. He said they let Georgia down and let Steve and Lynette down. Those words did not bring Georgia back. They did not answer every question, but they confirmed one central truth. The system itself acknowledged failure. Even then, the aftermath frustrated Georgia's family. Misconduct meetings later examined the actions of officers and a staff member who had handled previous incidents involving Reynolds. One officer received a written warning. 2 others received management advice. A member of police staff was subject to a written warning. The force said there were errors relating to efficiency, attention to detail, management control, and supervision. It also said those errors did not create an identifiable causal link between the 2008 actions and Georgia's murder in 2013. For Georgia's parents, that outcome was not enough. That tension must sit at the heart of any honest documentary about this case. Institutions often speak in cautious language. Families speak from the wound left behind. Both are part of the public record. The facts show Reynolds was responsible for murder. The reviews show serious concerns about prior handling. The official disciplinary outcome stopped short of saying those earlier errors directly caused Georgia's death. But the public question remains. If the earlier attack had been treated with the full seriousness it deserved, would Georgia have known to stay away? If the altered images had been disclosed to the young women involved, would warnings have spread through the community? If the 2011 incident had been linked properly to the 2008 attack, would someone have seen the pattern? If the February 2013 encounter had triggered alarm, would Reynolds have been able to lure Georgia 3 months later? No court can answer those questions with certainty, but Georgia's family has lived with them every day. Now step back to the days after her disappearance. A family is waiting. Police are trying to track a van. Public appeals are moving across news broadcasts. Friends are sharing concern. Reynolds is giving false accounts. And inside the investigation, the shape of his planning is becoming clearer. The court later described how Reynolds had tried to distance himself from Georgia's death. He had sent messages from her phone. He had canceled arrangements with 2 other young women he had lined up for the following day. He had used his stepfather's van. He had taken items linked to Georgia. He had moved across a large route. He had deleted incriminating images from a camera and transferred material to an external drive. This was not panic in its purest form. The court saw planning, deception, and control. When police interviewed him, Reynolds told lies. He claimed stories that shifted as evidence was revealed. When investigators recovered images and records, his accounts changed again. He did not formally accept responsibility until months later. That delay forced Georgia's family to prepare for the possibility of a full trial. On the 3rd of October 2013, Reynolds pleaded not guilty at Birmingham Crown Court. On the 2nd of December, the first day of his trial at Stafford Crown Court, he changed his plea to guilty. That plea spared the family the full trial process, but the judge gave it limited weight because of the timing and because the evidence against Reynolds was overwhelming. On the 19th of December 2013, Jamie Reynolds was sentenced at Stafford Crown Court. He was 23 years old at sentencing. He had been 22 when he murdered Georgia. Mr. Justice Wilkie imposed a whole life order, meaning no minimum term and no ordinary possibility of release. The judge had to decide whether the case reached the highest level of seriousness under the law. He found that it did. He listed aggravating factors. The murder was planned. It was designed for sadistic and sexual motivation. Reynolds took steps to avoid detection. He treated Georgia and her family with calculated cruelty. He had targeted others. His past conduct showed this was not isolated. The psychiatric evidence also mattered. Professor Peckett, a forensic psychiatrist, concluded that Reynolds did not have a recognized mental disorder that explained away his conduct. He was described as intelligent and plausible, someone able to learn new tactics and strategies. The report said he posed a grave risk to women and had the potential to become a serial killer. Another forensic psychiatrist described recurrent violent sexual fantasies and a tendency to seek such material and enact it. The judge said he took the assessment seriously. He also said the seriousness of the offense itself justified the whole life order. For Georgia's family, the sentence brought a form of justice, but it did not bring peace. Outside court, the public heard words from a father who knew no sentence could restore what had been taken. That is one of the hardest truths in any murder case. The justice system has sentences, orders, hearings, and appeals. Families have empty rooms, birthdays that stop, and memories that refuse to fade. Then Reynolds appealed. In 2014, he challenged the whole life order. Reports said the appeal argued that his age and guilty plea had not been given enough weight. On the 31st of October, 2014, the Court of Appeal rejected the challenge. The order that he should never be released remained in place. That legal outcome is simple to state. It was much harder for George's family to endure. They thought sentencing had closed one door. The appeal opened pain again. It forced the family to revisit the case, the arguments, and the fear that the strongest sentence might be reduced. It was not reduced. Reynolds stayed in prison, under a whole life order, but the legal ending did not end the public reckoning. After the conviction, the focus shifted to what had been known before George's murder. The serious case review and independent investigation forced uncomfortable details into public view. The 2008 attack had been mishandled. The investigation had been too narrow. The images and risk indicators had not led to the kind of wider safeguarding response George's family believed was needed. Agencies had not coordinated with enough force. This is where the competitor transcript's strongest structure appears, and this is the structure your documentary should keep. It begins with the discovery, then reveals the known danger, then moves backward to the last walk, then builds towards systemic failure. That order keeps viewers watching because each answer creates a bigger question. First question, what happened to Georgia? Second question, who killed her? Third question, how did he get close enough? Fourth question, why was he free after earlier warnings? Fifth question, who was meant to act? That progression creates outrage without inventing facts. It lets the records speak. The records show Reynolds had been involved in earlier incidents. The records show agencies knew pieces of the risk. The records show Georgia's family believed her death was preventable. The records show West Mercia police apologized. The records also show the force's later position that individual errors did not legally establish a causal link to the murder. That balance matters. A responsible true crime script does not need to exaggerate. The facts are strong enough. Georgia Williams left home at 7:30 on a Sunday evening. That is enough. The person she trusted had already attacked another girl under a false pretext. That is enough. He had written about violence involving real young women he knew. That is enough. He had contacted around 16 young women about photo shoots. That is enough. Police later tracked him across Wales and Scotland. That is enough. He pleaded guilty and received a whole life sentence. That is enough. The serious case review found a confused and uncoordinated approach involving multiple agencies. That is enough. No invention is needed. The horror of this case lives inside the verified record. To understand the emotional center, you must return to Georgia, not Reynolds. Georgia was a young woman who had chosen service as part of her identity, student leadership, mentoring, air cadets, plans for the RAF, volunteering connected to football, helping others. Those are not background details to fill time. They explain why this case struck so many people so hard. Georgia seems to have lived with openness. She noticed people. She included them. She did not move through the world expecting kindness to be turned against her. When Reynolds presented himself as someone trying to build a photography portfolio, she treated the request as something a friend might help with. That is the betrayal. The case is not scary because Georgia made a reckless choice. It is scary because she made a human one. She trusted someone familiar. Most people do. That is why the public safety lesson cannot be reduced to simple advice like never trust anyone. Life does not work that way. People know classmates, co-workers, friends of friends, quiet people at the edges of a group. Trust often grows through ordinary contact. The issue in this case was not that Georgia failed to see a danger no one had shared with her. The issue was that other people had seen parts of that danger, and the warning never reached the people who needed it. That is why the review matters as much as the conviction. A murder conviction answers who committed the act. A serious case review asks how warning systems worked before the act. In Georgia's case, those warning systems did not work well enough. The 2008 incident is the turning point. A young woman was lured to a home. She refused to move where Reynolds wanted. He attacked her. Police became involved. Images and violent interests were discovered. A risk assessment raised alarm. Yet the case ended in a final warning. 5 years later, Georgia was dead. The wording must be careful. We cannot say, as a legal fact, that one decision directly caused Georgia's murder. The later misconduct findings did not identify a causal link in that way, but we can say the earlier handling failed to prevent Reynolds from continuing along a dangerous path. We can say the serious case review criticized the quality and coordination of the response. We can say Georgia's parents believed the death could have been prevented. We can say the chief constable apologized and acknowledged the force should have done better. Those are documented facts, and those facts are powerful. By the middle of this case, the audience should understand that the villain of the story is not mystery, it is escalation. Reynolds did not begin with Georgia. He moved through warning signs, a false pretext, an attack, violent images, a rejected advance followed by a car incident, another young woman trapped in a house, contact with multiple potential targets, written fantasies, a final plan. This is the pattern viewers need to see. A safe documentary does not need to repeat the worst physical details. It needs to show the chain, because the chain is the lesson. At this point, if you are still watching North American Case Files, hit the like button and subscribe. Cases like Georgia's deserve more than shock. They deserve attention to the decisions, delays, and warnings that shaped the outcome. Your support helps these stories reach people who care about justice, safety, and accountability. Now the timeline turns toward court, where the facts became part of public record. Reynolds' guilty plea meant jurors did not decide whether he killed Georgia. He admitted it. The issue became sentence. For murder in England and Wales, a life sentence is mandatory. The question was whether there should be a minimum term before any future release consideration, or whether the seriousness was so high that a whole life order was required. Mr. Justice Wilkie found that this was not a borderline case. The law allows whole life orders for the most exceptional murders. The judge considered Reynolds' age. He considered the guilty plea. He considered psychiatric reports. He considered aggravating factors. He considered the planning, the deception, the targeting of others, and the conduct after Georgia's death. Then he imposed the harshest available sentence. For viewers outside the United Kingdom, a whole life order means the person is expected to spend the rest of his life in prison. Apart from rare compassionate release powers, it is reserved for the most serious cases. Reynolds became one of the youngest offenders in British history to receive such an order. That sentence reflected the court's view of the danger he posed and the seriousness of what he had done. But sentencing could not repair the broken trust left behind. Steve Williams was not only Georgia's father, he was a police officer. That added another layer of pain. He had served the same broad system that his family later believed failed his daughter. When parents outside the system accuse police of failure, it is painful. When a serving officer says his own force let his daughter down, it lands with a different force. The public apology from West Mercia Police did not come in vague terms. The chief constable said they let Georgia down. He said they let her parents down. He said other young people were let down too. That line matters. Other young people. Georgia was the one who died. But she was not the only person exposed to risk. The earlier victims and potential victims also lived with the consequences of what was not done. Some only learned later that Reynolds had altered images of them or written about them. One young woman linked to the case reportedly said that if she had known earlier, she would have warned Georgia. That is one of the most painful ideas in the entire case. A warning held in a file helps no one if it never reaches the person in danger. This is not a call for public panic. It is a call for proper safeguarding. When law enforcement or agencies identify credible risk, the response must match the danger. It must not depend on luck, memory, or one worker knowing what another worker saw years earlier. It must be coordinated. It must be recorded. It must be followed. Georgia's case shows what happens when the chain breaks. The serious case review identified confusion and lack of coordination among agencies. That language points to systems, not one simple bad choice. It means the people and services around Reynolds did not hold a shared picture of his risk. It means key information did not move with enough urgency. It means warning signs were treated as separate incidents rather than parts of an escalating pattern. That is often where preventable danger hides. One event seems strange, another seems troubling, a third seems frightening. But only when placed together do they reveal the full pattern. By then, for Georgia, it was too late. The aftermath in Wellington showed how deeply she had been loved. Tributes poured in from family, friends, school, air cadets, and the football community. Her funeral took place at All Saints Church in Wellington and was attended by around 800 people. Around 150 members of the Air Training Corps were part of the public tribute. These details show a community trying to carry a grief too large for one household. Her sister Scarlett described her as the best little sister anyone could wish for. Her school remembered her as enthusiastic. People connected to AFC Telford United remembered her involvement. The details all point in one direction. Georgia had made herself part of the lives around her. That is why ending the story with Reynolds would be wrong. He took Georgia's life, but he does not own her memory. In June 2013, Georgia's parents helped establish the Georgia Williams Trust. The charity was created to give young people opportunities connected to challenge, growth, and life-building experiences. The Charity Commission lists the trust as supporting young people aged 11 to 18 in the Telford and Wrexham area through grants and activities that help them develop as individuals and members of society. That legacy is not a soft ending. It is resistance. It says Georgia's name will be attached to life, not only death. The trust reflects who she was: active, open, brave, drawn to service, drawn to helping others feel included, drawn to experiences that stretched people beyond fear. Her family did not get to see her finish her plans. They found a way to help other young people move toward theirs. But the questions remain. Why did the 2008 attack not trigger stronger action? Why were young women whose images had been altered not warned in a way that might have helped them protect each other? Why was the 2011 incident not joined properly to earlier concerns? Why did the system not build one complete risk picture before Georgia walked into Reynolds' home? Those questions do not weaken the case against Reynolds. They make the case larger. They move it from a story of one monster to a story of warning signs, institutional response, and missed chances. A responsible true crime documentary must hold both truths at once. Jamie Reynolds murdered Georgia Williams. He pleaded guilty. He received a whole life order. His appeal failed. At the same time, public reviews and statements show that agencies had earlier chances to understand the danger he posed. Georgia's family believed those failures mattered. The chief constable apologized. Misconduct proceedings confirmed some errors. While official findings stopped short of making those errors legally causal, that is the factual balance. And it is enough to make the story devastating. The most frightening part of Georgia's case is not a shadowy stranger. It is familiarity, a known person, a trusted setting, a false reason to visit, a message from her own phone, a family believing, for a short time, that she was safe. The second most frightening part is the paper trail. There were records before Georgia died. There were names. There were images. There were incidents. There were professionals. There were agencies. There were chances to see escalation. By the time Georgia's body was found in North Wales, the system was no longer looking at a surprise. It was looking at the final result of a pattern that had been visible for years. That is why the case still unsettles people. It asks something uncomfortable of every institution responsible for safeguarding. When a young woman survives an attack, does the system treat it as a lucky escape or as a warning about the next victim? When disturbing material is found, does the system ask who else might be at risk? When a man targets women who reject him, does the system see isolated anger or a growing threat? When multiple agencies know pieces of a dangerous person's behavior, who owns the full picture? Those questions matter far beyond Wellington. They matter in every town where someone is known as odd but harmless. They matter in every workplace where rejection turns into intimidation. They matter in every school or community where one girl knows something another girl does not. They matter every time a warning is minimized because paperwork is easier than prevention. Georgia Williams did not have the information that might have changed her decision. She did not know the full history. She walked into a house under a false pretext. She did what many kind people do. She tried to help. And that is why her story should never be told as a simple cautionary tale about trusting the wrong person. It should be told as a warning about what happens when documented risk does not travel fast enough to protect the people in its path. The records after George's death show a clear timeline of accountability. Reynolds was arrested. He was charged. He pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to a whole life order. His appeal failed. A serious case review examined the earlier agency contacts. Misconduct proceedings followed. The force apologized. Georgia's family continued to speak publicly about the failures they believed led to her death. That is the public record. But the private record is harder to measure. A mother waking at night. A father carrying the final memory so others would not have to. A sister left with a best friend missing from every future moment. A community gathering around a funeral. A trust created because grief needed somewhere to go. True crime often focuses on the person who killed. This story demands the opposite. The more you look at Reynolds, the more you see danger. The more you look at Georgia, the more you understand the loss. She was 17. She was a student leader. She was an air cadet. She wanted to serve. She helped people who felt pushed aside. She had a future that stretched far beyond the road, from her home to his. That is why the final image of this case should not be Reynolds in a courtroom. It should be Georgia's name attached to young people getting opportunities through the trust created for her. It should be a community that refused to let one man define her story. It should be a family asking the question no apology can erase. Why did no one stop him sooner? To answer that, we return once more to the beginning, not the night of Georgia's murder, but 5 years earlier. A teenage girl escaped from Reynolds in 2008. She went to police. Evidence of violent interest was found. A risk assessment raised concern. The matter ended with a final warning. That is the hinge of the case. Everything after it becomes part of the same unanswered question. If that first known attack had been treated as a warning about future harm, what would have changed? Would Reynolds have been monitored differently? Would the young women connected to the images have been warned? Would later incidents have triggered a more serious response? Would Georgia's name have remained only on school records, air cadet memories, family photos, and the future she planned for herself? We do not know, but we know this. The system had more than one chance to understand him. Georgia had only one life. That imbalance is why people still talk about this case. During sentencing, the court made clear that Reynolds had shown no genuine remorse. He had lied. He had delayed responsibility. He had planned not only the killing, but the deception after it. He had tried to make Georgia's family believe she had chosen to disappear for a while. He had tried to turn their love and trust into a weakness. That deception did not last. Investigators traced his route. The van mattered. The mud mattered. The public appeals mattered. The search teams mattered. The evidence spoke. But the evidence after the murder only solved the crime. It did not prevent it. Prevention is the part that failed. And prevention is the part Georgia's case forces us to examine. There is a reason the opening of this documentary begins in the woodland, rather than with childhood memories. Not because Georgia's life is less important, but because viewers need to feel the central shock first. A young woman was found far from home. Then comes the second shock. The person who put her there had been known to authorities. Then comes the third. Earlier victims and warning signs existed. Then comes the final question. What should have happened before Georgia ever left home that Sunday? That structure is the strongest way to tell this case because it mirrors the way the public learned the horror. First, a missing girl. Then, a body. Then, a suspect. Then, a confession. Then, a whole life sentence. Then, a review that showed the past had been full of alarms. The tragedy deepens at each step. Georgia's final Sunday began like a normal evening. Her family had no reason to treat it as a permanent goodbye. She left home at 7:30. She had told them she was going out. She was expected to return. The early messages from her phone gave false comfort. The delay before she was reported missing was part of Reynolds's design. That is why the phone detail sits so heavily in the case. Families trust messages because messages feel immediate. A phone feels personal. It carries voice patterns, habits, sign-offs, the rhythm of a person's normal life. Reynolds exploited that intimacy. He did not only take Georgia from her family, he used her phone to keep them from knowing she was already gone. That is documented. That is central. That is enough. The van route then widened the geography of the case. Wellington to Wales, Wales to Chester, north toward Kendal, then Glasgow. A trail crossing borders, designed to confuse and distance. But trails leave marks. A vehicle appears on CCTV. People remember helping a stuck van. A public appeal produces information. The route becomes evidence. The same movement Reynolds used to hide became part of the case against him. That is an important investigative lesson. Criminals often believe distance protects them. But distance creates more chances to be seen, more cameras, more fuel stops, more witnesses, more receipts, more mistakes. In this case, the mistake near the Nanty Garth Pass helped lead police to Georgia. Still, finding Georgia did not end the pain. It began another stage of it. Formal identification, post-mortem findings, court appearances, media coverage, family statements, a funeral, a guilty plea after months of denial, sentencing, appeal, review, misconduct outcomes, years of public memory. For the family, justice was not one moment. It was a long corridor of moments they never asked to walk through. The case also forced a national discussion about whole life orders. Reynolds's age made the sentence notable. Whole life orders are rare. The judge had to explain why. This case crossed that threshold. He pointed to planning, motivation, deception, prior behavior, and danger. The Court of Appeal later left the order in place. That tells viewers something important. This was not a sentence driven only by public outrage. It was grounded in legal reasoning, statutory factors, psychiatric evidence, and the documented facts of the case. The court did not see Reynolds as a young man who lost control in one moment. It saw a planned killing rooted in a long pattern. That difference matters. A momentary act and a planned pattern demand different public responses. Georgia's case belongs to the second category. This is also why the serious case review became so important. A planned pattern offers chances for intervention. If someone moves from fantasy to a real attack, that is a major escalation. If the same person later targets women who reject him, that adds context. If he traps another young woman in his home, that adds urgency. If he then invites multiple young women to staged photo shoots while his family is away, that is a critical danger sign. The system did not hold those points together in time. That is the central failure. And that is the reason this case should not be treated as one more dark story from the archives. It is a case study in escalation, information sharing, risk assessment, and missed safeguards. For North American case files, the strongest message is this: Georgia's story is not about fear for fear's sake. It is about remembering that early warnings matter. It is about asking why survivors' reports are sometimes minimized. It is about asking why disturbing evidence does not always trigger wider protection. It is about making sure the next warning sign gets treated as the start of prevention, not the end of paperwork. The official records also show how grief turned into action. The Georgia Williams Trust continues the work of keeping her spirit visible through support for young people. The Trust's purpose fits the life Georgia was building. She loved challenge. She served in uniform through the Air Cadets. She took part in community life. She wanted young people, especially those who felt left out, to feel seen and able. Her family and community took that spirit and placed it into something that helps others. That does not erase the crime. It does not balance the loss. But it refuses to let the final word belong to Reynolds. Every case has a final question. In Georgia's case, the question is not whether Jamie Reynolds was guilty. He admitted murder. The court sentenced him. His appeal failed. The real question is what society does with warning signs before they become memorials. Do we wait for the worst outcome and then say lessons will be learned? Or do we act when the pattern first becomes visible? Georgia's case shows the cost of waiting. It shows a young woman whose trust was abused. It shows a family misled through messages from her phone. It shows investigators piecing together a route across the country. It shows a court confronting one of the most serious murders in recent British legal history. It shows a police force apologizing for earlier failures. It shows parents who refuse to let official language soften what happened. It shows a charity built from grief. And above all, it shows that Georgia Williams was not only a name in a sentencing document. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a student leader, an air cadet, and a young woman with a future. Her life mattered before the crime. Her warning matters after it. When people say true crime should be told responsibly, this is what that means. Do not turn Georgia into a shock image. Do not reduce her to the method of death. Do not repeat graphic details for effect. Follow the record. Name the failures. Keep the focus on the human being. Ask what should change. That is how this story deserves to be told. Jamie Reynolds will spend his life in prison under a whole life order. That is the sentence the court imposed. But Georgia's family received a sentence too, one no judge announced and no appeal court reviewed. They live with the absence. They live with the what-ifs. They live with the knowledge that warnings existed before Georgia died. That is why the question remains sharp after all these years. Who protects the next Georgia before the worst happens? If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to North American Case Files. Share your thoughts in the comments with respect for Georgia and her family. What should have happened after the first known attack in 2008? What should agencies do when multiple warning signs point to one person? And how do we make sure young women are protected before danger reaches the point of no return? Georgia Williams was 17 years old. She had plans. She had purpose. She had people who loved her. She deserved to come home. She deserved a system that connected the warnings. She deserved a future longer than one Sunday evening. Remember her name, Georgia Williams.